Okay, Sherita, so I know this has been a journey for you. Tell me, how do you remember Tony as a child?
As a child, Tony was very lovable, playful. He always had a smile for you. He was very smart, picked up things very easily. And, in each stage, he was on target for each stage and never had any behavioral problems or anything like that.
And then when did you begin to notice something was different?
He was around either 18 to 24 months, around that age, because he had started saying words and little two-word sentences and things like that. He had eye contact, and then he just kind of lost his speech. And I was very concerned because I had worked with children. I had a lot of nieces, nephews, cousins, but I also worked with children in an orphanage before when I was in high school. So I knew signs and I knew, what was a concern. So I took him to the doctor, and they did a battery of tests at Portsmouth Naval Hospital, and they really never gave me a diagnosis though. Um, I remember taking him in periodically to be checked, and sometimes he would go in and they would do little things with him. I think he had some speech therapy, and then slowly his speech came back. And that was really good because I know some children on the spectrum, they will lose their speech for like 5 years or longer. One thing about Tony, he when he lost his speech, he started doing repeating everything I said or what somebody say, which is called echolalia. And that's where you say something, he'll say the same thing back. He didn't have direct eye contact, so I had to redirect him, when he talked to me. And it was those things. When he was 4, he was put in a pre-K. It was over off of Corpru area somewhere in Norfolk. I can't remember the name of the school. Eastern Preschool or something like that. And he went there, and I think that really helped him because they worked, with children, that was on the spectrum or intellectual disability. But still, I didn't know that he was labeled on the autism spectrum or having Asperger's.
When did you get that? How much longer?
He was 11. He was 11. He had an IEP in school. He was in some classes where they had the co-teach classes, and then where the teacher had a co-teacher come in and help her, and then he was in some like special education classes. But Tony, like I said, he was really smart, but he had a problem with concentrating and focusing, which is the ADD, attention deficit disorder. But he wasn't hyper. Unlike a lot of children that's on a spectrum, Tony didn't have behavioral problems. He didn't, fall out on the floor crying, or he didn't act up. He was just the sweetest little boy. And, I just remember back then that he never had that. But when he was around 11, we went to a doctor he was seeing, who's a neurologist, and he proceeded to tell me that, don't expect Tony to, do this or do that, like go to college or drive or live alone and stuff like that. And I said, hold on, doctor. I said, my son is smart. And I was telling him about Tony's grades and stuff like that. And even back then, he was starting to work with flowers because during summer months, my children would go home to Louisiana and Tony would be with my mother, and the other two would be with my other two sisters. And so my mom had flowers and plants all over her yard, and he got hooked on that, and that's what he stayed with. And he also liked to draw airplanes. So I knew it was going to be one of those two things. But when I told the doctor about him being smart in those things, he changed him. He had him as PDD, persuasive, persuasive developmental disorder. And then he changed him to Asperger's. So Asperger's being the more high functioning side of the autism spectrum, which they don't actually use that anymore. They just say autism spectrum disorder or children that's on the autism spectrum. But I still say Asperger's sometimes. So that's when I was actually given a diagnosis.
Okay, so I was like around 11 or so. And then so he went on and middle school, high school, and did fairly well.
Yes, yes, he did. Like I said, Tony, he never liked getting bad grades. He struggled with some things, and I think it was due to the ADD and getting that right, because the medicine that they would give the children, some of it is not good for them. I know one medication they gave him, I think it was Dexedrine. He started having tics. And when he started having the tics, he was making sounds with his mouth, or he kept hitting his stomach or something like that. And then they said that it was Tourette's syndrome. So instead of them looking at it being a side effect of the medication, they gave him another diagnosis of Tourette's. And I find that's what they do a lot now. They don't look at the side effects of the medicine. They just see something else, and then they give the child another diagnosis and more medicine to combat that. I didn't really see a change in Tony until he became a teenager, and when they started putting him on other medications that he didn't need. What he really needed was more intensive behavioral therapy and definitely speech therapy. And I didn't know about the speech because he could talk and basically express himself. But, being on the spectrum and lack of socialization skills and communication skills, they still need to have speech therapy to be able to really get out their emotions. Because even now, when I ask Tony things, he doesn't want to talk about it. And sometimes maybe he doesn't know how to, or it's hard for him to express his feelings. But I just started noticing some things during his teenage years when they would give him medicine. One time they gave him medication, and he got these sores on the corner of his mouth, and he kept doing like that. And then he would make funny gestures in the mirror. And I'm like, he wasn't doing that before. And so I called the doctor, and we got him off of that. I know Tony like the back of my hand. I can tell anything that he's taken or given, I notice it. And so I try to get him to notice that. When you get a new medication, if you feel differently, then you need to let me know, let the doctor know, let your caseworker know, somebody. Because obviously the medicine is not the right medication for you. And but yeah, he went on to graduate in 11th grade. I applied for the middle college high school. It was a program they started through TCC, and it was for high school kids in the 11th and 12th grade to go to TCC and earn college credits while they're there, and also finish their high school classes. So Tony got into the program. So he was going to TCC and taking his high school and college classes. He also was going to Votech. And he didn't have to go to Votech, but he loved plants. And so he took Votech to do the greenhouse or with the plants over there. So I would have to leave work at lunch drive all the way over to Voltec, Military Highway, take him down to TCC, and then go back to work. And then he wouldn't get home till like 8 or 9 at night. But, he would catch the bus and he would, he knew how to get around. He knew how to do all of that. He was very independent. So what the doctor told me, I'm like, no, that's not my son. And so he graduated from Middle College High School. He had a graduation, of course, through Booker T. Washington, because that's his home school. And then after that, he went on to Christopher Newport University, and he graduated there.
And then there were some struggles with him in that time that you told me about before. Did he become violent, or tell me a little bit about that?
Aggressive, yeah. During that time, like his last year, he struggled with anxiety. Tony never liked getting bad grades. And he was pretty good the first 2 years. And like starting with the third year, he was starting to get more anxiety. And then by his fourth year, his last year, he was just really, really anxious about graduating, I guess what he was going to do afterwards, his finals, his tests, and all of those things. And I took him to the doctor, and they put him on, medication for anxiety. He was on a medication for the ADD. Then I think they put him on, it's so many medications he's been on. They just put him on a lot of different medications. And I think they were antipsychotic medications, probably depression medications. And Tony did not react good to those medications at all. He had very bad side effects, and the side effects were aggression. He became very angry. Before he went to college, I think back, one of the medications they had given him, and I don't know what it was, but he got very angry one time. But he didn't seem angry. But I told him to go clean his room, and he didn't. So, I fussed at him and said, Tony, you need to clean your room before you do anything. And so he went outside, and I guess he just got really, really mad. And so I was at the back door, and I saw him, and I can look in his eyes and tell that it wasn't my son, something was going on. So I tried to get my other son in the house. And before I could get him in the house, Tony came to the door and opened the door, and he hit me. He knocked me out. And I had a black eye. I had a bruise, on my arm. And I remember waking up with my next door neighbor and my other son looking over me. And after that happened, though, Tony was very, very sorry, that it happened. But like I said, he didn't have behavioral problems in school. I really believe that a lot of the medication caused those behaviors. And the doctors I took him to, I don't think they really know, to me, the difference between people on the autism spectrum and people that have a mental illness. Because, like I said, when they would give Tony medication, like the medicine the doctor had given him for ADD, and he started having the tics, they diagnosed him with Tourette's. But it wasn't Tourette's. When they took him off the medication, it stopped. So, he was given that whatever medicine, and I don't know what that medicine was at the time when he was a teenager, but we got that under control. And then he had a pretty good, life at that time. He was, like I said, going to school, and he was getting things done, and he was doing it all. He, learned how to drive, and he was driving. So when he went to college, I think after during his first year, I bought him a car. So, because I used to go up there every Friday, fighting the traffic, and bring him home every weekend and go back. But I got him a car, and he was driving. He stayed on campus. All the things the doctor said that he wouldn't do. And he was doing it just fine. But that last year, the doctor just kept giving him more and more medicine. I think he was on at least 6 or 7 medications.
And what were those medications for him?
I couldn't even tell you. I have a list of them because I keep all of his paperwork. I have paperwork when he was just 2 years old, or actually younger than that. But I can remember there were a lot of, antipsychotic medicines, and I'm sure antidepressant medicines, and maybe medicines for OCD, because Tony was diagnosed with OCD. But they just weren't working. And then whenever I tried to tell the doctors or his nurse practitioners, they wouldn't listen to me. After college, when I was trying to deal with all of the aggression and all of the medication, I found a doctor that was able to help him and get him off of all that medication. And he might have been on 2 or 3 medications. And one of the medications, the Invega Sustaina, it is an antipsychotic, but it was used for OCD because Tony kept having thoughts and he couldn't shake them. So the OCD medications didn't work. So she put him on that one medication, which actually worked for him. And I thought that was really good. And he was doing fine for a long time. But I found out later that the antipsychotic medications decrease your dopamine levels. And I've researched, and I know that people with ADD or ADHD already have low dopamine levels. So that's why they give them the stimulant, the Adderall or Ritalin or Vyvanse, to increase the dopamine levels so they can, function better and concentrate. So the Invega Sustaina depleted, well, I won't say depleted, but it stifled the dopamine levels. And I noticed that Tony would always say, I feel flat. I felt flat. He didn't want to do as much. I noticed that he wasn't happy. He wasn't being goofy or laughing and, stuff like that with us. He even stopped working with his plants a lot. I mean, my whole deck would be covered with plants in the wintertime, in the summertime, spring, fall, because he always worked with his plants and tried to create new plants. And he kind of lost that. And I didn't know what the reason was until he was going to this other doctor and he wanted to go up on the Vyvanse. And I had a concern with that because I felt that he had become dependent on the Vyvanse. And the doctor said, well, I think that's okay for him to go up because the Invega stifles the dopamine levels. And that's when the light bulb went off in my head. That's what it is. That's why he feels flat. That's why he, doesn't want to do the things he wants to do. That's why he just lie around, all the time and really have no energy and, because of that. So I'm like, okay, so they're giving him the shot. To me, it was like giving him a downer. And then when he take the stimulant for ADD, they're giving him an upper, instead of looking at the situation where, okay, this person has, ADD, but you're giving him this that's making his dopamine levels lower. And then, like I said, certain medicines it was about 2 years before that. I noticed that when Tony started having his medicine, he started using up his medicine before it was time to get it refilled. And then I noticed some of my medicine was missing because I have fibromyalgia. And I was taking some of the same medicines, especially the pain medicine. And I noticed some of my medicine was missing. I'm like, okay, I don't take my medicine that much for it to be gone. And then that's when I realized that he had been taking my medicines. So I called this doctor. I never got a call back about it. And then one day, one weekend, because I was working up in D.C., I came home and I noticed that Tony was acting different. He was complaining about tingling in his fingers and in his arms and having headaches. So warning bells went off because that's kind of what happened when he became aggressive when he was in college. And so I watched that. I watched him. I went back to work, and then I came home the next weekend, and it was the same thing. And he was at my house. So one Saturday night, he was on the floor, and I know he'll lay on the floor on his computer and stuff like that, but he was asleep. And so I went to wake him, and I couldn't wake him up. And I shook him and I shook him. I couldn't wake him up, and I was getting very scared. And finally, he woke up, but I could tell he was heavily sedated. And when I got him up, he had blood coming down the side of his face. He had he hadn't had a bruise yet, but later we found he had torn the muscle on his shoulder when he fell. I had a hole in the wall where he hit the desk. He hit the pointy side of the desk, and that's where the blood came from. And the other point went into the wall. And I asked him, I said, "What are you taking?" And then that's when I found out the doctor had switched him from the Invega shot and put him on, Seroquel. It's another antipsychotic, but it's very heavily sedating. And then I found out he was prescribed 240 50 milligram pills of Ultram or Tramadol, which is a pain medication that the doctor was using off label for anxiety. So I saw that big bottle of pills. I'm like, and there weren't many in there. But I'm like, why would he prescribe you 240 50 milligram pills for 1 month? So I don't know how much of those pills Tony had taken along with the Seroquel, but he basically almost overdosed.
Yeah.
And
And so you're at the point now where with all those medications and everything, you feel like that he can get back to the person he was in college when he was.
right, right. I know he can. Um, Tony, he came to me a few weeks ago. He said, "Mom," he said, "I want to feel like I felt when I was a teenager." And it just broke my heart because he has struggled and suffered so much with this medication, and I just can't get the help or find the help that he needs. I keep coming up with roadblocks, resistance, and he's just hurting. He's doing a little bit better now on mood stabilizers, but he still doesn't have that motivation, and that's part of what dopamine does. Dopamine is part of your neurotransmitter, and it's dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. That that's three of them, but there's more. But those are the really three that helps people deal with depression. And the dopamine is one that is responsible for motivation. For when you want to get up and do something and go do something and get something accomplished. And he doesn't have that drive. And and then of course now he can't focus because he's been taking off all of the medicine for the ADD. No doctor wants to give him that. And Tony's at the point where he wants what he wants because he know how he felt when he was given the Adderall or the Vyvanse, and it made him feel normal. And I can understand him wanting that.
So in the process of trying to find the right thing for him, he is involved now with Community Services Board.
Yes, we got involved with them when the time when he almost overdosed, and that's when around the time when we got involved with the Community Services Board.
And he was about 20 something. 20.
Yeah, he was about 22, okay. 23. No, wait, no. I think he was more like 25, 26, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
got involved with the Community Services Board, and the relationship was okay
Oh yeah,
initially,
yes.
but it's a contentious relationship now, would you say?
Oh yes, very, very. I had no problems then. They were very helpful. But now it's like I'm fighting. I'm fighting the whole Community Services Board. I'm fighting, Norfolk Police Department. I'm fighting everyone, um, to get my son the help he needs. And they are retaliating against me because, they don't understand. And that's another thing that I am trying to get out and bring out to people, that family members that have loved ones with a mental illness or are caretakers go through a lot of stress, and it's a lot. And when Tony became dependent on the medicine, and he became very dependent on it, I took him back down to the Community Services Board the second time, because after we went the first time when he almost overdosed, he was okay, and we hadn't had to go there for a while. But then when I noticed him becoming dependent on the well, he was already dependent, but he had started using this supplement called kratom, and it's a supplement that they sell in the tobacco stores, and in high dosages it acts as an opioid, low dosages it acts as a stimulant. And Tony found out about that because I do a lot of supplements, and he tries to do that. But I never go to the tobacco stores. I'm not sure how he got that. But so he started using that, and he was, I won't say he was dependent on it at that time, but he used it to help supplement, the Vyvanse, so he can feel better. And
That made
I,
things worse.
I'm sorry.
That made things worse.
Well, yeah, it made things worse because when I went to the Community Services Board. I had put Tony in a treatment center to try to get him back on track and get his dopamine levels and everything back on track. But they didn't understand that, so that didn't work for Tony at all. So while he was in there, I had gone to the Community Services Board to try to get things set up, so when he came home, he could go right into it. And it had been a few months, and he still hadn't started getting any services. So Tony was coming off of the Invega shot. After we found out that the shot suppresses dopamine, Tony didn't want to go back on it. He didn't want to go back on it, and I really didn't want him to go back on it either, because I saw what it did to him. But he was adamant about it. So took him to the Community Services Board, but he was coming off of the shot, so he was having side effects. And about 2 weeks before I took him down to CSB, he was out in the yard and he would say stuff because I told him I needed him to dig up one of his plants, and he loved those plants like it's his own children, and he didn't want to do that, so he was upset with me, and he said something about hit you in the mouth. He'll say something out loud, and then the next thing I knew, he hit me in my face. And I called the police, told him what happened, told him he was coming off of the medication, and they didn't assess him or anything like that. And so that happened. So 2 weeks later, I took him down, and while we were talking with his caseworker and the supervisor and the other lady that was in the room, I was explaining to them how important it was for Tony to get the help because of what he had done a couple of weeks ago and how he was behaving, because he was starting to get aggressive like before. And he got mad at me. Tony got mad at me, and he punches the wall, and then he punches the clock and breaks the clock. And then he comes by me and raises his fist towards me. But he didn't hit me. Mr. Stewart took him out, and they called emergency services to have him assessed. And when they did that, I came home and I got his medication, and I took it back down to the Community Services Board, because at that point I didn't trust his actions. I didn't with things that happened when he was in school and he was aggressive, and I started seeing those things. I mean, and when he was in school and all the aggression, he kicked in my back door, my front door, he kicked in my bedroom door. He was just so angry. And it was all pretty much, geared towards me because I'm the caretaker. I'm the one that, you know, I'm the one that he can look at being the bad guy if I don't do what he wants me to do because I know it could harm him. He's not thinking clearly. So when that happened, I took the medicine down to them. Um, and then the next day they gave him his medicine, and then I got a call and they told me to come get his medicine. And or they was going to throw it away. And so I emailed them and I said, I'm not going to come get his medication. I said, did you not see, the aggression he had towards me? If I do that, he's going to want me to keep giving him more medicine. And I don't feel comfortable with that. And so they threw his medicine away. Now, they didn't try. I know they got a PAC team. Tony was on that before when we had the problems. But they had reached, they could have tried to put him in a PAC team. They could have had him come over there, and get his medication because the next week after that, he had a doctor's appointment. So it was only a week until he had an appointment where they could have did something, but they threw it away. And then when that happened, he started getting that kratom. I mean, a whole lot more than he was. And he was just really out of control. He was coming to my house all hours of the day and night, banging on my door. I mean, banging to where my pictures were shaking, my glass was breaking, was shaking, my windows. And I was really, really scared. In fact, I was terrified. And, I would call 911. I called them almost every day. And I remember one time, that same day that I took the medicine down, he came to my house banging on my door. I called 911, told him what had happened, what had taken place at CSB, and that I didn't feel comfortable, that I felt scared. And she said, okay, so I'm thinking someone's going to come out. Well, no one ever did. About an hour later, because I looked at my clock, I called them about 5:30. Around 6:30, I get a phone call from 911 asking me if I was okay. And I said, excuse me? I said, is this the new 911 process? When someone calls you for an emergency and then you call them back in an hour to see if they're okay? I said, what if I was on the floor, knocked out? Or, what if I was dead or something? How could I answer that question? And I was upset. I said, don't ever call my house again. If I call you for 911, don't call me to ask me if I'm okay. Send a police officer over. And so I got those 911 phone calls and, where they would label me as being irate. They would label me as being, yelling or hard to talk to or whatever. My thing is that they don't understand, what it feels like to be scared, especially of your own son. What it feels like to be terrified, because that's how I felt. The way he was banging on my door and what I knew from him from the past, it was scary. It was terrifying.
And so that was kind of the beginning of all these calls to 911 and some of the videos that you have of you interacting with the police. Because at that point you're thinking, I'm hoping that they will agree to have him assessed.
Yes. And I was very shocked that they, when we were at CSB and he punches the wall and the clock and stuff, that when they assessed him, they didn't find anything that he needed to be in the hospital. I know, and I've seen it, Tony would be upset, but when they come, he would have calmed down by then. And then so they will look at that and they ask their questions. Are you homicidal? No. Are you suicidal? No. They look at him and see that he's, he's taking care of himself, and then they would, the other thing was could he, could he put himself in trouble or get in trouble by his mental state? So not saying that he would be homicidal or suicidal, but with his mental state, could he go out and get in trouble because, he's not functioning mentally as he should? And so that would cause him to put himself in harm's way. And so if he didn't meet any of those, especially the first two, I don't really think they look at the second two. But the homicidal, suicidal, they don't, if he says no, that's fine. Even though I'm telling them I feel threatened. Even though I've told them he's kicked my door in, more than one time. I tell them all of these things, and they don't listen to me. It's like I am the bad one, and I try to explain to them, this is my son.
What do you say to people who say that you're confrontational or you interfere with his treatment?
Well, I say that they are not a mother who has been fighting for years to get help for her son. I've even written a paragraph that I include in my letters, just so they'll know this, because I think that is exactly the way they see me. And I'll read you part of that. I said, in the eyes of some people, my passion is taken as a confrontational attitude, when in fact it is the raw emotion of a mother who is desperately trying to save her son in an overwhelming situation. And, I put that in there to hopefully they will understand, how hard this is for me. You just can't imagine day in and day out. I do this every day. I'm always writing letters. I'm looking up treatment centers. I am looking up doctors. I am writing my, governor, my state senators, my state representatives, delegates, mayor's office, all of those people, and I don't even get a response back from them. And that is really frustrating, and it hurts because it's like they don't care. Once they get in office, you just is a number to them. You were just a vote to them. And it's not just me.